This rather battered looking small form factor PC was made by RM, or Research Machines, way back in 2004 and would have been a very familiar sight in any British classroom around that time because they were pretty much the sole supplier of school PCs. It has a 3 GHz Pentium 4 CPU dating from 2004, it has the original 2 GB of RAM, it has an IDE hard drive and PS2 keyboard and mouse. It's very much a product of its time. And yet, here it is quite happily running Windows 10. I installed this a couple of days ago using the latest installer from Microsoft's website, didn't hack anything, didn't modify anything, just installed it straight from USB. And by and large, it seems reasonably happy on this machine. There are some missing drivers and stuff, but surprisingly enough, it does support most of the hardware, including the network card. So I can actually get this thing online and get it updated and use it for browsing the internet and stuff. Or at least I could if there was any actual hard drive space left, because yep, like an idiot, I forgot to check the size of the hard drive before I went ahead and installed this, and it turns out that 8 GB is pretty much entirely filled by Windows 10 by the time you've got it all installed, making the thing run even slower than you would expect on such a CPU, and making it completely and utterly useless. But I thought I would do some further experiments because this is very, very promising indeed, and see what else I can install on this, and maybe see if it's actually usable in 2024. So let's do that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I thought I would just explain the CPU in this machine and why this is actually quite interesting and why this actually even works in the first place. And what better way to do that than to show you some of my hastily shot phone footage of this test installation of Windows 10, which took well over 2 hours. In fact, it took over 2.5 hours to install Windows 10 on this machine. And it's only the 32-bit version, and I will explain why in a moment. But yeah, this CPU is an Intel Pentium 4 Prescott. It was released in October 2004, and the specific model is very interesting. It's a 530J/SL7PU. And the reason this CPU is interesting, and it's just a 3 GHz, 800 MHz CPU, the reason this CPU is interesting is because it was one of the very first consumer CPUs to support the execute disable bit or non-execute bit. AMD did have this feature a little bit earlier than Intel, but I was firmly in the Intel camp back in the day, and that's also what this PC actually came with. So that's the route that I've decided to go down. And the execute disable bit it's basically a security feature that allows the CPU to mark certain code in RAM as non-executable. It's not really important for our purposes. All we really care about is the fact that this CPU actually supports it. And this was introduced as a requirement in Windows 8, but it turned out that the OS itself didn't actually use it if it wasn't present. It's just that the installer checked for it. So people worked out very quickly that you could just patch that check out of the installer and install the OS and run it quite happily on those much earlier Pentium 4s. But that was not the case with Windows 10. People did initially try to patch it out of the installer and discovered that Windows just didn't run properly at all. It was incredibly unstable because it was actually using that feature. Now, as I mentioned, I installed the 32-bit version of Windows 10 on this machine, and the reason for that is because I tried the 64-bit installer and it just kept freezing up and rebooting. And it turns out there's actually a very valid technical reason for that, even though this era of Pentium 4 did support 64-bit instructions. And the reason is because there are certain operations that weren't supported in 64-bit mode with the Prescott CPUs. So I'm going to have to upgrade to a slightly later model from the Cedar Mill family of CPU. And I'm afraid to say that this specific CPU was released in January 2006. So doesn't quite meet our criteria for being 20 years old. It's still very, very old, but yeah, I think I've taken this as far as I can with 32-bit Windows 10. And to be honest, I want to see if I can run Windows 11 on it, as crazy as that sounds. Of course, it's going to need a little bit of help, so I'm also going to have to upgrade the hard drive. That one will be period correct, and I'm also going to stick an AGP graphics card in it as well, which is also period correct. They're both from 2004 or before. So forgive me on the CPU, but I think to make for a more interesting video, we're going to have to make one ever so slight concession. But hey, don't you want to see Windows 11 running on this thing? I know I certainly do. Right, that's our original drive out, and that's a Western Digital Protégé something or other from August 2004, and that's only 8 GB, which is completely useless, so let's put something a bit more suitable in. And this is the best I could find. It's from September 2004. It's a 120 GB ATA133, so hopefully should be a bit better than that original one. Apparently somebody spent £52 on this at some point, and that somebody may well have been my friend Matt from my university days. So shout out to Matt. Don't know if you're still watching. Unfortunately, we're not still in touch, but I did eventually find a use for that old hard drive that you gave me. This is the CPU that I'm going to be installing in this machine. As you can see, it's a 641, so it's a Cedar Mill Pentium 4, 3.2 GHz, so nice speed bump compared to that 3 GHz CPU that's in there already. But crucially, of course, it should support those additional 64-bit instructions that we need for 64-bit Windows. And one thing that I really do love about this motherboard is that it's an LGA 775 socket. So these don't actually have pins on the bottom, they just have these flat contacts, and the actual pins are in the CPU socket itself. I was actually a really big fan of this, this particular era of Pentium 4, so nice to have one in my collection. What I'm not such a big fan of is this stock cooler. They're a bit of a pain, quite fiddly to get on and off, and I always worry that I'm going to damage something, but there we go. It's what came with the machine, and I don't have any other Pentium 4 coolers, so if I do end up keeping this longer term, I may well change that for something a bit fancier, but it'll do for now. So this is an ATI Radeon 9600 graphics card. It's AGP, and I bought this on eBay for £19, believe it or not. And the reason I chose this particular card is because it's one of the later and kind of more powerful AGP cards that you could get, but more importantly, it's low profile, so it will actually fit into that small form factor case. But of course, it's got this extra bit on the top, this extra bracket. It's a full height AGP or PCI type bracket. So I also managed to track down this, which I bought from another random seller on eBay for a couple of pounds, and hopefully it should fit this card. I mean, it does actually look, if you look at that, it does look like the bits actually line up properly. So I get my old radio controlled car tyre spanner, which I've been using for God knows how many years to take these cards apart. And that should just unplug from there. Now, the trouble is, of course, by removing this, we're actually losing the VGA port, but we do still have the DVI connector on here. This is absolutely filthy, isn't it? This is disgusting. It's all rusty, and I noticed that on the back it's got some kind of mud or something, so I'll clean that up before I put it in, or I guess I'll test it first and I'll clean it up later if it does work. But yeah, we've got the DVI port on here, so hopefully with a DVI to VGA adapter, I shouldn't need that VGA port anymore, and hopefully that should work. So I'll get this back bracket attached, and then hopefully we can get that straight into the PC. Yeah, I think that's actually going to work. Beep, that's good. Ah yes, 3.2 GHz, so the new CPU has been recognised, that's fantastic. Got a picture on the screen, so that graphics card is working. So yeah, and excellent. So it looks like Matt was actually running Windows 98, and yeah, the date on that hard drive was 2004, so evidently a very late holdout for Windows 98. A general failure reading drive C. Okay, hopefully that doesn't mean we've got a load of bad sectors and stuff, but anyway, we've got everything in place that we need now to try to proceed with this this rather foolhardy Windows 11 installation, and for that I'm going to be using this USB stick, which I have already prepared, Just a few things to bear in mind. I've downloaded the standard ISO file from the Microsoft website, and I've used a tool called Rufus to copy that to the USB stick. And the reason I've done that is because Rufus in the latest version has a load of options that you can pick to override certain checks in the installer. Of course, we've got that infamous TPM requirement, but also a CPU check and a RAM check, which we want to completely skip because there's absolutely no way that this machine is going to meet any of those requirements. So yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, Windows 10 just installed, completely unmodified, no problems at all. But for 11, we're going to have to make a few small tweaks. But again, hopefully you will allow me this concession just to get this rather foolhardy experiment up and running.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Oh my goodness, so we've actually got as far as this initial setup screen. I tried to do this before with the previous CPU and just got an error about it not supporting 64-bit, so this is a massive improvement. It's taken 12 minutes from me initially pressing space on that boot from USB to get to this screen, so I'm glad I'm not recording this entire process, but I thought I'd just do these first initial steps. Let's just go install now. And wow, Windows 11 setup is actually starting on a Pentium 4 CPU from 18 years ago. How cool is that? So just very briefly access the floppy drive, which is quite cool to see, but yeah, it's asking me for the product key. I think we can skip that quite safely. And which version do we want to install? Let's go for Windows 11 Pro. Yeah, why not? Let's install Windows 11 Pro. We can always run one of those debloating type scripts later on if it's absolutely horrific. So we've got to agree to the license agreement. I can't believe this is actually upgrade. Should we see if we can upgrade Windows 98? I don't think so. Let's just go for a clean install. And let's delete all of this stuff. Sorry, Matt. Hope you didn't need any of these files. I don't believe it. So that's actually started copying files to that IDE hard drive. Yeah, let's see how it goes. Unfortunately, we have fallen at the first hurdle, and that hurdle is the hard drive. I should have twigged when I tried to boot it into Windows 98 and we got that error, but there you go. It seems the drive is dead. It just sat at 0% doing absolutely nothing for about 10 minutes and making a bit of a clicking noise. So yeah, not the greatest sign, but I have found this other Mac Store hard drive. Unfortunately, this one's only 40 gigs, so hopefully that's going to be enough to satisfy Windows 11 and allow us to install some stuff on there. So yeah, I'll get this one installed and then hopefully we'll get a little bit further with the installer this time. Excellent, that is looking a lot more promising. We're up to, what, 48% now, 49%, and yeah, percentage-wise, it's actually rattling through this installation really quickly, which is really cool to see, especially compared to my 2.5 hour experience, or ordeal, I guess is probably a better word, installing Windows 10 on the same machine. So yeah, looking promising so far. The installer did complain that it wanted at least 52 gig free on the system drive before installing, but I clicked on next and it just carried on anyway. So who knows, hopefully this 40 gig drive will be sufficient, but we're off to a good start so far. Nice, so still looking very promising. We're half an hour into the installation process so far. We've had a reboot, all the files have copied across, it's all working great, and we're now at the getting ready stage. So I'm actually feeling pretty hopeful that this is at least going to do something. Not quite sure if we're actually going to be able to get a usable desktop experience out of it, but exciting stuff. Well, this is rather exciting. So we're about an hour into the install now, and it's just rebooted and gone into this update screen. It seems to be downloading updates. There is some network activity, so I guess the network card has been recognized by Windows 11. The PS2 mouse is working fine, the PS2 keyboard is working fine, obviously IDE hard drive, that graphics card. This is all looking rather promising. So yeah, an hour so far, but hopefully won't be too much longer until we can see an actual working desktop. Fingers crossed. And I'm very pleased to report that the installation was a success. As you can see, we've got Windows 11 Pro here running on a 20-year-old Pentium 4 PC with an IDE hard drive, 2 GB of DDR400 RAM, and a PS2 keyboard and mouse. And by and large, it all works. I mean, there's a couple of missing drivers, as we found in Windows 10, so no sound driver for this and no graphics driver, although I must admit the generic Windows graphics driver is actually doing a pretty decent job here, so my hat is off to Microsoft for that. But that's pretty much where the good news ends. You see, I let it finish updating. As you can see, the hard drive activity has pretty much completely died off, and I thought I would do a cold boot test and see just how long it takes to get to a usable desktop. And that took well over 5 minutes from a cold boot, and then it was probably another minute or so until it was actually responsive enough to do anything. So I fired up Edge, as you do, and I wanted to test the mean time to Clint, which of course is the most important benchmark, going from that cold boot to LGR's beautiful face on our screens via the medium of YouTube. And that took nearly 10 minutes, 9 minutes 55 to get to the point where we were playing a YouTube video on LGR's channel. And it was horrific. It was completely unwatchable. And no, that's not a comment on the actual content itself. Performance was that bad. So as mentioned earlier, I decided that I would try a Debloat script. So I just went onto Bing using the Edge browser that was built into Windows, and I searched for Windows 11 Debloat and basically just ran the first thing that came up. It removed absolutely loads of stuff, and yeah, I've now rebooted and we're back with a debloated Windows 11. I've already had a little bit of a poke around, and I have to say it is looking a lot better, so let's continue with our tests. Now, of course, one of the things that people are going to be wanting to do on a low-end Windows 11 system like this is browse the internet. Just use a web browser and, you know, look at web pages and all of that kind of stuff. I don't think it's too much to ask for a system like this. And as you can see, Bing loads up pretty quickly under Edge. No complaints there whatsoever. Of course, I have loaded this up previously, so some stuff will be cached. But actually quite impressed with the performance of this. It's very usable. If you're used to using some of the older Raspberry Pi systems and stuff, I think it's very sort of comparable to that. But of course, nobody uses Bing, so I'm going to go to Google. Yeah, apologies to all the Bing fans in the comments, but there we go. So yeah, that's loaded up, no problems at all. And there is one specific website that I want to check out, and there's a very good reason for this. As you can see, it's all loading up very quickly, no issues whatsoever. Some of this stuff will be cached. Like I mentioned, I have visited this website previously on this machine. But we'll just see how quickly this loads. Of course, the rendering speed is also quite important. No network drivers to install. The network card was just supported in Windows 11, so no issues there whatsoever. But yeah, it's loaded up quite quickly. And we'll go to the results section. As you can see, I'm already logged in. And the reason that I wanted to show this to you, and I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, is because, of course, I have benchmarked this system compared to some other stuff that I have lying around the studio here. So as we can see, I mean, let's start at the bottom of the list and work our way up. None of these are particularly incredible systems. I mean, this is a Dell laptop. It's a 6th generation i5. I think that was from around 2016 or so that's 8 years old. And the other one was one of my previous work laptops, which is a 3rd generation i5. That's a Lenovo E530 laptop. And I think that was from around 2012-ish, something like that. And yeah, here we have our unknown Intel Pentium 4 system here, which I benchmarked earlier, 1 core. And our scores, our single core score and our multi-core score compared to these two systems, yeah, it's absolutely nothing, isn't it? I mean, it may as well be non-existent. And yet Windows 11 runs on this. And the funny thing is, I'm still running Windows 10 perfectly happily on both of those two laptops. I use them for stuff like video capture from old systems and taking notes and downloading drivers, making USB sticks and burning CDs and that kind of stuff. And Windows 10 runs great on both of those systems. And I've had the pop-up on both of them telling me that neither of them are compatible with Windows 11 and that I'm going to have to buy a new computer to be able to upgrade, which is absolutely crazy, considering it runs on something like this. And, well, I say it runs. Obviously, we go through to the compute section, which is the GPU benchmark. and you'll probably notice that there is no result for this machine. And the reason for that is because I tried to run the GPU benchmark a few times and it just completely crashed out. So I don't have any result. I don't know if it's because it doesn't like the generic Windows 11 driver or because it instantly runs out of RAM or whatever. But there you go. So that's the Geekbench result. So I thought that was quite amusing. We can also click through to this and we can see some more information about the system just to prove that I'm not trying to cheat the system at all. We've got an Intel Pentium 4, one processor, one core, 2 threads, and we've got the model number, 3.2 gigahertz there, socket 775 Cedar Mill. Level 1 cache, 16 kilobytes, level 2, 2 megabytes. And yeah, 2 gig of RAM, 400, and you've got the rest of it. You've got all the individual results for all the tests there. Another quite amusing thing about this, just before we move on, is that if we look at the actual clock speed of the CPU, this is 3209 megahertz. It's actually a faster clock speed than the 2 modern computers that came after it. Of course, they've got multiple cores, and this has only got the 1, and that's progress, I guess. But let's move on to something else. So, of course, one of the things that I wanted to do with this system was watch some YouTube, and I'm well aware that there are some optimized browsers for kind of lower end systems and stuff like that, but I wanted to see what the default experience was like in Edge. And all right, I've got no audio because I have no audio drivers. I'm going to have to look into that, but to be honest, I have done a bit of a preliminary search and not managed to find anything. So unfortunately, unless I get hold of a PCI sound card that's compatible with Windows 11, I think I'm just going to have to make do without audio. But the playback, I mean, it's nowhere near as jerky as it was before. It's actually quite surprisingly fluid, all things considered, for a 20-year-old computer. And I'm not quite sure what bitrate are we at. So we're at 360p resolution here. I'm not sure if we can make this full screen or if that's just going to end up being a huge mistake. Yeah, I mean, it's moving. I am actually pleasantly surprised with this. I mean, let's just turn the bitrate right down. Of course, nobody's going to be watching YouTube in 144p, but let's see how smooth it is. Of course, we can't actually read anything on screen, but it's playing in full screen. Well, I have to admit that is actually quite impressive, given the hardware that it is running on. I mean, the fact that it's playing anything at all is yeah, I'm genuinely shocked at this. I mean, that's actually quite smooth. I appreciate nobody's actually going to be watching YouTube in 144p, but hey, it is what it is, and I'm quite impressed with that, I have to say. Right, so this is something I actually ran into earlier when I was installing Geekbench, which took forever. And that is anything to do with I/O. Just seems painfully slow on this machine. And I think it's just to do with that old IDE hard drive. To be honest, this motherboard does have SATA connectors on it, so I could plug in a modern SSD and see if that makes any difference to the performance. Obviously install Windows 11 directly on the SSD. And to be honest, I think it probably would. I think it's probably swapping quite a lot, and I think that would actually make life a lot easier for me. But yeah, browsing and stuff, not really so bad at all, but when it comes to actually installing applications, everything just takes an age. And one thing that I really wanted to try on this was Office 365, because, hey, an older machine like this might be good for word processing and basic Office stuff, but, oh yeah, okay, it's just taken off, so you never know. We'll see if we can get something installed at least, and just see what performance is like for that. I must admit, I'm not really a modern Windows user. I made the jump to the Mac a couple of years ago, although I do still keep my toe in there, and I'm certainly not a fanboy. I do like to keep my fingers in as many pies as possible, but what is going on here? What is this Microsoft 365 thing? I thought I'd installed Office, and if I try to launch any of these apps, it just opens in a browser, which is, all right, it works, but it's not really what I was going for. So I think I now have to go through, okay, that's going to take me to a browser window. And I think I now have to go through and install the apps separately, do I? I just want Word. I just want to see Word running. Just give me Word. I must say, I was just poking around Explorer, just waiting for that to start in the background. I have actually closed Edge just to try and free up some RAM. I must say, I do quite like these icons. These are really nice. I quite like the design of those. And I also spotted the hard drive. Of course, the installer complained that it needed a 52 gig hard drive to be able to install Windows 11, and just let me install it anyway on that 40 gig drive. But as we can see, we've still got 15.7 gig free, which is quite a respectable amount. So hey, that's some good news. I think this is just installing in the background. Yeah, just getting things ready. I also noticed it's got this tabbed interface, which is quite nice. I've never really used Windows 11, and I think the tabbed interface is something that has been sorely lacking in Windows up until this point. So that's quite nice to see. So, you know, just wanted to report on some positive news before I get too frustrated with this whole thing. But yeah, of course, we have run into that I/O issue again. I guess we're also running out of RAM constantly, which isn't surprising with 2 gig of RAM. One thing I did want to mention at some point in this video is that, of course, this is a budget motherboard. It does only support 2 gigabytes of RAM, and if it did support any more, I would have fully upgraded it before I started this. But there were actually some pro or you know, enthusiast gamer type motherboards around in 2004 that did support 4 gigabytes, and I probably could have gone down that route. Of course, they do cost a pretty penny nowadays, and ultimately, if you're looking to run Windows 11 on old hardware, you're better off spending that kind of money on something like a second-hand i5 system or something like that, and just bypassing the hardware checks anyway. But yeah, here we go. So please stay online while Microsoft 365 and Office downloads. It's 6:45 at the moment, so I guess we'll see how long it takes to install Office. It took about an hour and a half to install Windows itself, which I must admit, I was actually quite pleasantly impressed by. So, yep, let's go. And I won't record all of this. Next time you see me, hopefully, I'll be running Microsoft Word. I'm back, as promised, and don't pay too much attention to the clock in the corner of the screen. I have actually been editing this video as I go along, and this did finish quite a while ago. I think it took about 30 minutes to install Office, but I thought I would leave it on this screen just so we can see what it's like launching some of these applications for the very first time, or at least Word, because I am slowly losing my marbles here, and I do need to go home and have some dinner, because I have been at the studio all day. Now that's the kind of grueling schedule that I put myself through just for you. So this is launching Word for the very first time on the 20-year-old Pentium 4, and let's see how we go. So this all looks very familiar, much better than that browser-based stuff that I was getting before. Now I imagine this is going to take quite a bit longer to start up the very first time than it will on subsequent starts, because obviously it's got to install some stuff in the background and set some stuff up, but here we go. And here we are. So this is Word launched for the very first time. It's got my theme and everything set up on there, because obviously I had to log into my live account, although it is coming up as unlicensed at the top. What is going on here? This is madness. And it's just disappeared. Okay. Right. I guess we'll try that again, shall we? I mean, you can see how responsive Windows is just to use when you've got nothing running on this old system. It's actually quite impressive. And we're back. Not quite sure what happened there, but that was so much quicker to launch the second time, which is nice. Oh, I see. Did I not accept the license agreement last time? Microsoft, what is all this? Go away. Thank you. So yes, here we go. Word launched for the second time. Is it about to crash again? What is this? Why is there so much stuff popping up all over the place? Go away. Yes, Microsoft Word. Right, now let's create a new document. See how quick that is. So that was much quicker to start that time. That probably took all of about 20 seconds, something like that, which is great to see. We're straight in, no problems at all. So we'll just start up Excel for the first time and create a blank workbook. And again, this is the very first time I've launched this, so it's probably going to take a little bit longer, but I mean, look at that. That is surprisingly usable. Go away, why is all this crap popping up all the time? That is surprisingly usable, isn't it? A little bit laggy, but again, that has surprised me. That is genuinely impressive on such old hardware. So you might be wondering why I'm stood here with this, the IBM 5150, the very first DOS PC from 1981. And of course, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll no doubt be very familiar with this. It's something I've featured on the channel quite a lot. Now, the reason I got this off the shelf was to drive a point home, I think, and a point that became very, very apparent to me when I was making this video. And that's to do with progress in the world of the PC. Now, when this was released in 1981, it was absolutely revolutionary. It had a 4.7 megahertz CPU, it had 640K of RAM, it had twin floppy drives, and if you had Bill Gates money, you could have a 20 meg hard drive in this. 20 years later, completely and utterly worthless, completely and utterly redundant. You wouldn't run 2001's operating system on this 1981 PC, which of course, 2001 we had Windows XP. Everyone was online, we were watching DVDs on our computers, burning music CDs, all of that kind of stuff. It's crazy to think that nowadays, the latest and greatest, all right, arguably not the greatest, but latest and greatest Microsoft operating system running on 20-year-old hardware. It's bizarre, it's mind-boggling to someone like me who lived through the 90s and saw that rate of progress and 3D graphics cards coming in, CD-ROMs coming in, the internet, all of that stuff. It's quite sad, really. It is quite sad to see. And yet, at the same time, it's quite amazing to see just how well it does run. Once it's been debloated, all that telemetry and phoning home and tracking stuff and ad stuff, once that's all ripped out, actually it's quite a sort of sleek and efficient operating system, really, in the grand scheme of things, to be able to run on such a low spec PC. But anyway, that thought just blew me away, and I just wanted to share it with you. So thank you ever so much for watching this video. I know it's been a slightly longer one on my channel, but I've been here in the studio all day making it, and of course I put weeks worth of preparation into just getting this thing to work, so I'm really glad that you've stuck with it till the end. Thanks of course to all of my supporters, my Patreon supporters, YouTube channel members, and indeed on Coffee for all of your financial support for the channel. Helps to pay for these kind of projects and also for the rent on the studio itself. So without you, this wouldn't be possible. But yeah, that's all I have for you for now. I would like to look at some gaming type stuff on this, maybe see if it can run Crysis and that kind of thing, but I do want to see if I can sort out the graphics driver and the sound driver situation on it. So if you have any suggestions on that side of things, please do let me know down in the comments. And of course, if this video gets lots of likes and shares and things, then that's just going to motivate me to make a follow-up and have a bit more of a play with this thing. But I've waffled on for long enough for now, so once more, thank you ever so much for joining me in this video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye!